why one more aid tracking system? So we'll just talk about why we are doing it, how we are doing it, the approach we have taken, and then I hope that there is some time for discussion that how we can make it better and more sustainable, as one of the challenges has been identified. This is just a presentation outline that I'll start with an introduction and we'll show the path where we'll go. GFDRR, our name itself is our mandate. GFDRR stands for Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. We are one of the World Bank's global partnership. It contains, as of now, 45 members, which includes 38 country governments and 7 international organizations. And this project, particularly disaster aid tracking, is one of the initiatives that we have partnered with Development Gateway through AidData. Why do we need it once again? Maybe the overall development assistance framework was much simpler a while ago, but lately it has been getting complex more and more. And especially now when there are so many multilateral institutions involved, big chunk of development assistance goes through them. There are new vertical funds, private NGOs. It makes much more sense to really keep a tab on aid. And especially in the field of disaster risk management, what we want to do is to convert aid information into impact. And how we want to do that will follow. But how can donors, recipients, and NGOs better coordinate their efforts? How the recipient governments can better plan their budgets and optimize their own external the funds that receive from outside, as well as their domestic resources for DRR, recovery and reconstruction. By the way, this is a new acronym that we have built, DR4, and I might use it more often. We are all talking about the citizen feedback. Means how Patrick, whose tax money goes through Sudanese government to Parvez in Bangladesh, is there any link if Parvez has something to say about it? So here citizens can be both the donor country as well as recipient country. So this is something that we are very much interested in having. Let's see how we can do that. And finally, we all want to learn from our past mistakes that right now, especially when it comes to humanitarian aid versus disaster risk reduction related aid, there are huge differences. And there might be certain kind of disaster risk reduction mechanisms which may work better than others. So how we can learn from our experiences. So we have taken this kind of two-phased approach, that one thing is to increase the value of DR for aid information. And while doing it, once again, we don't want to create a new system at all. We are just trying to create a new paradigm where disaster-related aid has a better quantification, better categorization codes, and still it is part of the global system, so we don't create another silo within the global development system. And we want to do it by, first of all, aligning with HFA priorities. HFA may be, let me just explain. HFA is Hyogo Framework for Action for Disaster Risk Reduction, an internationally agreed convention in 2004 by 168 governments. So what all we do in terms of disaster risk reduction, it has to follow this tenets of HFA framework. And there are 5 priorities that we work very closely with, and this is one of the driving factor of designing this disaster aid tracking. Another one is IRT, obviously, aid transparency and the new standard that we all need to talk in the same language. We need to improve our data quality or project level information quality, and there are certain other tenets that we want to follow, and of course, OECD's creditor reporting system. Eventually, when we say we don't want to create another silo, is also because most of the development assistance still flows around 65% through CRS, and we want to have certain things imbibed there in those classification structures so that disaster related projects are better identified and better categorized. And then another thing is that the world has been changing, and we all know about that just 20 years ago most of the development assistance flow through ODA, official development assistance. And just now, if you see, hardly 63%. So there are so many new bilaterals, BRICS, they have been engaging in an active role. There are so many new NGOs. So now we cannot exclude them. As Richard Manning pointed out in the morning, that he cringes whenever somebody has another analysis based on just ODA figures. So we need to publish non-traditional donors, some of the bilateral funds, vertical funds, philanthropies also at some point. So this is what we have set out to do, and I don't need to explain much in detail that how AidData model has been working. Steve's presentation was also on the same line, that the larger source is still CRS, creditor reporting system, but at the same time, so many other data sources, including the public sources like World Bank, Kuwait, China. No doubt CRS would have World Bank data, but it will be, I think, 1 year old. So this is what is happening, and then directly working with donors and assessing their annual reports, Ministry of Finance, their development agencies, and this all goes through data quality process. Once again, Mike and Steve both are there. So what we have been essentially doing is that improvising on this information. So once again, we are piggybacking on the existing database which is already available, but then we are just using a very finer comb to sift through all the projects and find out where the disaster-related information must be hiding. And let me tell you why we needed to do that. Because as of now in OECD's CRS, there is only one code for disaster preparedness and prevention, and that also lies within the humanitarian aid. And this leaves a huge scope open that so many projects which had disaster risk reduction related component, they are not accounted for. So if you go by simple statistics, right now disaster preparedness and prevention aid within OECD will be hardly 0.05% of the total ODA every year. So, and we all knew that this is something wrong, and there is no other reliable data source to do that, so why don't we start with that? And that's where we created a methodology to define and first of all sift through various other sectors and subsectors and activity codes where there is a possibility of any DRR related initiative to be hidden. And right now we have reached a status where we have developed a dashboard. We have also developed a methodology to double binding all the codes so that the project which is already in CRS, it also has a classification within DR, disaster risk reduction, means DR4. And we have also assigned 11 sub-activities. So it's always a kind of dilemma within the disaster risk management field also, that how much is going in risk assessment versus risk financing. Now all this information are much more important, and so far there is no reliable source where people can start using it. So we came from this huge demand-driven process, including our donors, who, despite having huge budget envelopes, when they were asked from their own constituencies, their own governments, that how much we are doing for risk reduction, how come every year now and again we give a lot of, maybe billions in humanitarian aid for post-disaster relief and recovery and assistance, against how much less we are paying or giving away for disaster risk reduction. So they also didn't have very clear answer because of the same standard classification structure which doesn't talk about TRR in detail. So we'll see a snapshot. You should thank me that I don't have any more maps for you. So this is the dashboard that we have developed. Right now we have taken all the projects from 1980 onwards, and once again, this is a beta version at gfdrr.aiddata.org. Please feel free to visit and provide your feedback to us. It's very important for us. And this just talks about how the trends are changing. Some of the smaller graphs on the left side, you will see that US has been getting more active on this subject. But if you go further into that, you will find out that still largest chunk is still humanitarian aid going for post-disaster recovery assistance. So this is something that, while we don't say it loud here, we also want to drive a point home, that it makes a lot of sense to invest in disaster risk reduction than post-disaster reconstruction and recovery. No doubt it's important, it's much needed, humanitarian assistance, there is no alternative to that. But if we invest properly in risk reduction, reducing risk will yield much more. And once again, we see it as one of the key ingredients of effective aid. So once again, this dashboard and our projects are also in line with IIT codes. So there are some other indicators that you will find. So you can search by sector, activity codes, by donors, by recipient, and I won't call it a map. And then you can go into a country and find out what all, say in Algeria, how much, which donor, who gave for what. And this is once again by activity code. So you can find out exactly how much has been given by donor X in country Y for only risk reduction. And let me make another point here that this is very important. So many times we have seen, I had been deputed to few country governments in my career with UN. And usually you find a very nicely decorated glass cabinets behind some of the senior officials. If you peep into them, you will find out that the work that you are negotiating with the government now, it was already funded 10 years ago by DFID or DANIDA or somebody else. There is a nice report available there. But somehow the way it happens that governments change, officials change, they move to other offices, and so much of this institutional memory, even the memory of having something already done, might get lost. So this is one of the another reason that why we are doing it, because we do think this will help. This will exactly help in avoiding the overlaps. That if somebody else is doing another risk assessment in Mozambique, this system will also help the donor in finding out whether I should look at this proposal favorably. At the same time, the recipient, the government should also need to think that who on our behalf is requesting another risk assessment. Let me take a look at that. So once again, this is kind of our vision. Maybe whatever we have started doing, we have hardly accomplished around 10 to 15% of what we actually have set out to do. I wouldn't like to spend much time on this. Once again, Hyogo framework of action for DRR. So all the projects are in line with the core priorities. So right now, as a global mechanism of HFA and UN International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, we are requiring all the countries to report on how much reform they have made on their disaster risk reduction agenda. And this will also, the outcomes of this particular exercise will also feed into that. That right now the focus is only the aid, also the commitments from the top level. But as one of the finance ministers pointed out, that external aid is hardly 5% or less than 5% of what the country will eventually do when it comes to disaster risk reduction. So we also need to peep into their own national accounts, and once again, if those accounts may not have a similar terminology like we have for DR4, it may not yield the right results. So this is something that we think will happen soon, and we have started dialogue through HFA and Busan Forum with few partner countries. When there is open source and collaborative technology, there will be APIs launched soon that people can start adapting and using it for their own purpose. And once we put this all information in public domain, I would say that open aid information and free press, it can work wonders, right? People can do anything and everything, and once they have access to certain level of information, we can't really fathom how much they can really go into the details and create some innovative tools out of it. And once again, this is fully compatible with OECD CRS, and we will continue doing that. Geocoding has been discussed in detail today, and once again, this works really well in disaster risk management also. And we would right now we have certain part of our projects are already geocoded, but we are continuing doing the rest of them, all the DR4 projects. Crowdsourcing in aid information management and reporting. Once again, this has been something we have discussed already. Community-based monitoring and evaluation. This will be something like Yelp for DR4 activities. That are things clicking well? All the initiatives are yielding the right results. And so far, so many times we always go into the discussion and debate about we don't have enough data. We don't have the required level of accuracy in the data that we collect. But at some point of time, I would foresee that the way we go to Amazon and find out the stuff which has the highest number of responses and the highest ranking, something like that will happen soon here in the development world as well. mobile apps, you know why we'll need that. One fine thing, the last point, that we always talk about bank being the knowledge bank, the institutions being the knowledge institutions. And when we are talking about just knowing a project level information about a project, it may make sense that if we have some more updates on that, how the project really worked out, what is the final report on that. And while those glass cabinets cannot be digitized, this is something that we can do at the top level and AidData has been spending a lot of time in talking to governments, looking at their project documents. So this is something that we want to do very soon. This has been discussed. The next step is that this is the last slide, by the way. The next steps are mainly to get this methodology that we have created so far vetted, peer reviewed by our counterparts in UN ISDR, as well as Interagency Standing Committee on Preparedness Financing. So these are already few loops that we are closing now. And disaster relief, recovery, reconstruction, risk reduction, mitigation. There are 1,000 terms, and right now in this room, I think we all will have our own definitions. But when it comes to the standardization, we'll have to abide by at least some standard code of conduct. So that is something that we want to bring in. So this will, in next few months, this is the process that we'll follow. And eventually, the aid management platforms that you have, plus we have some other pilots in Philippines and Indonesia through UN ISDR system. That is something that we want to close the loop with. I request please look at gfdrr.aiddata.org. I think www is not required. And thank you so much.